Welcome back. This video is a little bit out of sequence. I've got to design a new ship, the Nelson-class light cruiser for the Interstellar League, and I'm inviting you to look over my shoulder, as it were, as I go about doing it. I'm going to explain a little bit as I go along, but this is less about teaching the ins and outs of the ship design tab, and more about showing you how it works in action. If I do something that I don't explain, please bear with me. It will get walked through in more detail in a later video. Before I design the Nelson, I'm going to go over where it fits in the fictional continuity. The Nelson was one of the first cruisers the League ever built, and it was built as a precautionary response to what the League had seen of Rulamani designs. It's an early warship design built off of more of a theoretical tactical doctrine than one based on hard experience. It, like the Crockett, is going to be built around a giant keel gun, and it's built from weapons that have already been defined. So, on with the show. We're going to start with templating this off of a smaller ship. This allows us to put systems in consistent locations, which is great for player engagement and making sure that everybody knows where things are. We'll start by copying and pasting from the Kirkland design over to the tab where the Nelson lives on. So, over here is the Kirkland on tab 3, and we're going to select from column A through AY. We're going to copy, and we're going to go to ship 5, which is where the Nelson lives, and we're going to select from column A through AY, and we're going to paste. And while this is catching up with us, we'll discuss a few things that are going to go on through here. One of the first things we're going to do is we're going to hide these two areas here. We'll use them a little bit later in the process, but they're a wonderful set of analytical tools that are built in as part of the ship design tool set. Now, as we wait for the calculations to catch up with us, and it is slowly catching up with us. This is a very impressive spreadsheet in terms of what it actually does and how much processor resources it takes. It can take a little bit of a while there. It is currently making its way through the calculation process, and I believe it is now done. There it is. It is done. As you can see, we have 3,216 spaces used, 1,844 left, and a clutter max of 16. Clutter max is used for determining how many missiles something can throw, how big and how heavy the torpedo volley something can throw, and in the case of the Interstellar League, how much of the point defense that it can have. And if these numbers are the same on both sides of a battle, you're going to be in a situation where the point defense doesn't render the missiles and the torpedoes completely obsolete. There will actually be interesting decisions to be made on the table. Anyway, on with the show. We're going to start here with what I call the big 6 drop-downs, which are really 6 drop-downs and 2 pink boxes. These are the important ones for your ship. These are the ones that if you don't fill them in, you don't really have a ship. So right now, the Nelson has 2 bridge, and that doesn't seem right. That's appropriate for a destroyer, which is what we're templating off of. So I'm going to go and give this 4 bridge boxes for now. And that's going to give us 4 APs. It's going to allow us to lead 1 squadron or 2 followers. I think the Nelson probably wants to actually be a bit more of a flagship, so I'm going to tweak that bridge value on up to 5. You'll notice that it added a 2nd squadron here for us. So operational speed is the level of FTL that you can go through on the Stars at War campaign maps. And I think that FTL 4 is probably good. If we need to squeeze some spaces out of something, I may come back and reduce this to FTL 3. ECM 3 is one of the League's touch points here. I could drop it down to 2 to show that it is a earlier ship design, but I'm going to leave it at 3 for now, and I may tweak it down later. Maximum thrust. Thrust 4 is actually pretty expensive for a ship of this size. You'll see that it takes up 644 hull spaces here. I'm going to go and drop this down to a thrust of 3. And we're going to wait for it to finish catching up on the calculations here. And you'll see that that got us back almost 400 hull spaces right there. Now I'm also going to look at the maximum pivot. Now because I'm planning on building the ship around a keel-mounted weapon, it's one of those things that the early League liked a lot, and while it has its advocates, there are some drawbacks to keel-mounted weapons than actual play. But in order to make a keel-mounted weapon more viable, I'm going to leave that pivot rating up at 4, and you'll see how expensive that pivot rating is at 427 hull spaces here. Maximum roll, I'm going to leave at 2, and we're going to put the hull boxes at its maximum right now of 15. That's one of the places where we regularly tweak. when we need to get a few more hull spaces to pay for this and that and the other. So for over here we have component armor, and component armor is used to make certain systems a little bit more durable. We currently have component armor on the bridge and on the FDL drives. I'm going to go and add 2 more component armor 1 slots, and I'm going to add a component armor 2 slot because I think that's going to be handy on the giant big Hurricane gun that we're wrapping the ship around. And it has just updated on that, and now we get up to some of the important ones. You'll see this red box. It's basically telling us that we have 16 of 56 points left to distribute among these 3 boxes for length, width, and height. Now, the Squadron Strike ship design spreadsheet doesn't actually try and calculate spherical volumes. This is basically calculating the dimensions of the box that you could actually put the miniature in. It is a rough approximation, but it's good for getting your aspect ratios right. So I'm going to set this up for a length of 28, and then I'm going to go and make this a width of 22, and that's 50, and I'm going to go and put 6 on the height. And while we're waiting for that to update, we'll take a look at the actual art for the Nelson, which this is the side view that I'm moving my cursor around, and this is the top view. And you can kind of see from the top view that it is, that at least in the saucer section, it's a little bit longer than it is wide. It's really about twice as long as it is wide, but I want to actually keep this thing's pivot mode sensible and sane, or pivot cost sensible and sane. Okay, it's actually caught up with us, and now we're going to look at a few other of the areas on this part of the spreadsheet. Down here we have where it says left picture. It is giving us a place to type in the username, or not the username, the file name of the ship. So that we're going to update that to the Nelson, and we're going to update this one to the Nelson. And that will ensure that we have the right art appearing on the SSD. It is currently set up to auto-determine if it will be a 2-up ship or a 1-up ship. It will probably end up being a 1-up ship, but we'll find out a little bit later. Now over here, we have the ship's regeneration, and, well, we actually have the ship's shields. We'll be putting the regenerators down in a later section. But it gives us the regeneration on the ship that we started with from templating off of the Kirkland. It's got nose regeneration of 6, aft of 3, left of 6, right of 6, top of 3, bottom of 3, which is decent, but it'll probably get improved a little bit later on. Now, since we know that this ship is going to be using a giant keel gun for shooting at people, we're going to give it a slightly bigger front shield, going from 16 deflector shields to 20 deflector shields. We probably also want to bump up the shielding on the sides. We're going to go from 12 all the way up to 16. You'll notice that it turned red here. That's telling me that the shields for left and right are not symmetrical, which is a very handy thing to see because some people like to zoom in on this spreadsheet a lot and they don't actually see the aft, right, and bottom shield locations. I'm going to take a look at the aft, right, and bottom shield locations, but if you take a look at them already, because they have more surface area, you can see that they're pretty expensive to set up. Here, the top and the bottom both cost 271 hull spaces, or 270.671 hull spaces for the 12 protection they have, versus the 128.891 that's on the left and right. And you can see that the aft shield and the front shield are much, much cheaper. This is because the front of the ship is basically the skinniest part of the box. So we've adjusted the shielding here, and I'm probably not going to adjust the top and the bottom shields for now. And now we're going to go look at the next section of the ship. So having adjusted the shields, we are down to 775 hull spaces left. And you'll notice the ship has increased in price considerably. It's now 129 hull space. It's now 129 for the unit pricing. And we're going to take a look quickly through here. These correspond to the hit locations. Hit location 1, 2, 3, and so on, all the way on down to hit location 10. And because we templated this off of a destroyer, we've already got action point costs set up for various things on the ship. And we're going to leave this alone for now because we're going to go to the thing that everybody considers the fun part of all of this, which is putting in the weapons. Alrighty, so right now this has a nose fixed mount, and I could probably go and put in a heavy disruptor into the nose fixed mount with no problems. I could probably put 2 heavy disruptors into the nose fixed mounts with no problem. We're going to select those and wait for the spreadsheet to catch up with us. As it turns out, yes, indeed, I can put heavy disruptors into the nose fixed mounts. Unfortunately for this ship, we wanted to do something clever. We are going to go and put in a keel mount, and that's going to turn off the bottom row on the weapon mount there. And you can see that we have 429 hull spaces to play with, so we're going to go and put a capital disintegrator into the front of this ship. And we're going to wait for it to catch up, and eventually it will catch up, I hope. There we go. And that capital disintegrator is 419 hull spaces out of 429. We have 589 hull spaces left, and now we're going to go and take a look at things that we can do down here. Now this is the Closin defense system. This is a point defense gun, and it is set up for nose left and nose right. Those are basically just about left forward and left right arcs. They're designed to give maximum firepower and span. And I like the Closin defense system gun, and I am going to go and put 1 in each of these 2 mounts down here. And just to add a little bit of extra firepower, I'm going to go put in a disintegrator underneath these. Just putting in 1 for now. And then we're going to go wait for the spreadsheet to catch up, and it looks like the disintegrator doesn't quite fit. So they also took up a lot more hull spaces than you would think that they would, in part due to the problem that, well, not the problem, in part due to the fact that we already have 2 ECCM on the ship, and ECCM's cost goes up with the number of weapons that it can benefit. So it's not just a flat benefit going on all the way. So what I'm going to do for these is I am going to go and take these from span 3 to custom, and span 3 to custom. And I'm going to say that those disintegrators are, I'm going to say that these mounts don't actually reach directly underneath the ship. That'll make it a little bit more interesting to fly, because that's also a place where it doesn't really have much in the way of shielding. And by removing those 2 windows off of the firing arc, by going to custom and then changing these from yes to no, or actually just from blank to no, we have managed to make everything fit. So right now this ship has two disintegrators, and it has a gigantic capital disintegrator mount in the front. And one of the things I'm going to look at here, I've got 42 hull spaces left. I think it's time to go take a look at other systems on the ship. Okay, so right now, here is our movement track. And it's got a thrust of 3, a thrust of 2, and no thrust of 1. I'm going to go put a 1 on that thrust. And see how many hull spaces. That took up 12 of our hull spaces that's there. We have 30 left. We can't really increase the bottom or top shield regenerators that much. We don't have the budget for it. I could put a second aft shield regenerator on here, and I'm tempted to do so, if only so it will help pad the bridge a little bit and make the ship a little bit more viable. We are going to go add a couple of lab boxes down here. And that should just about use up all of our hull spaces. Actually, we need to get rid of one of these lab boxes because it probably ended up adding a little bit more crew to the ship. So there are -6 hull spaces left. we probably need to go and get rid of something here. This will be an easy thing to get rid of. We're going to drop the pivot rating. We're going to drop this 2 pivot box and add a 1 to the end of the track. And we're going to go put an action point cost on the 4 pivot box on this. That should free up a fair number of hull spaces for us to play with. I'm going to wait for the computer to catch up, and it has. Okay, now we have 125 hull spaces left, and you get to see how the designs kind of go iteratively as we run through them. We have ECM3 with 1 action point costs, and ECM1 for free. We have the 2 ECCM boxes up here, and at some point I probably need to adjust this so that it will show the numbers properly. But those are only costing us 37 and 29 hull spaces each. We have the transporters and the Marines. We've probably got 2 Marine platoons. Let's change that to a single Marine company. It will reduce the number of boxes that we have on the ship, but it will increase the number of boarding parties we can send to go on out and say hi to the neighbors. Or in our particular case, say hi to the Carthians and say, if you try capturing our ship, we'll capture yours. We have an auxiliary reactor, and it's probably time to go take a look up at things that we've got up here. We have 6 action points generated. That's 5 for the bridge, 1 for this auxiliary reactor. We would need a peak of 3 of them in the plotting phase. We would need a peak of 1 of them in the combat phase. And we would need a peak of 8 of them in the crew action phase. Now, in reality, we're probably never going to need all 5 of those action points at once, so some of these are a little bit redundant, and we will have some left over to use for shield reinforcement. And we still have 123 hull spaces left to play with. So, given that we have 123 hull spaces left to play with, I'm going to go and add 2 damage control parties, because you can never have enough damage control parties on a ship. And in fact, you can actually make a pretty decent oddball ship with an awful lot of component armor and a bunch of damage control parties. It is surprisingly durable. It plays like the cockroach of space. So working our way down through here a little bit, let's see what else we might want to do. Well, let's put another box in this roll track that we've put on here. We've got 44 hull spaces left. And I'm going to go use that to go put an extra lab down here, because labs are useful for certain kinds of scenarios and are important for the survey mission that the League is ostensibly still designing everything around. So with this many hull spaces left, I have a strong suspicion that including the ECCM values for SIDS, if I go and put another one here, I'll be pretty close to using all of my hull spaces when I update the CIDS. I'm well past it. So let's go and remove one of those labs once again, because weapons are generally more useful than labs. Alrighty, I'm 10 over. I'm going to go and free up some hull spaces by putting an action point cost on that roll, since we've got action points to burn. And that gives me 2 hull spaces left, which I'm probably not going to be able to use because I don't think I have anything that is that cheap that I can add to the ship. So what we've got here is we have 2 point defense weapons pointing out the back with decent arcs of coverage. They actually sweep all the way up to left and right, and they cover the top and bottom. We have a pair of disintegrators with nice wide firing arcs that completely overlap on the nose. That go up to the top and the bottom of the ship, and a pair of close-in defense systems, point defense weapons that are coaxial mounted with them. And we have a giant capital disintegrator up here, right through the nose. And if we look up here, we see that we've also got we've also got a pair of component armor 2 slots. We're going to put one of them right here on the on weapon mount S1, weapon mount S row 1. That will eventually come through and calculate its way around and give us a code next to there. You see it just updated. And we've still got some other ones to allocate. So it looks like I accidentally bought an extra block of Component Armor 2. I'm selling that back right now. And I think that the better places to put Component Armor tend to be on the things where your ship stops being viable if they get shot off of it. So I'm putting the Component Armor 1 slots that are left on the maximum thrust and maximum roll. And it is updated, and we have 51 hull spaces left. So we happen to know that a point defense gun costs us about 44 hull spaces when it is it has a nice wide firing arc. So we're probably going to go and put another one down here. Now, I am going to go and put one on the second row down here, although I have space for it on the first. Actually, I'll just put it on the first. This is the after point defense gun. And we put that in there, and now we're waiting for the calculations to come on up. And it shows that we are 3 hull spaces over. And with those 3 hull spaces over, I'm going to go and chop off 3 hull boxes. And we wait for everything to catch up, and it has. And we now have a ship, and it costs 164 points, and it has 14 zone defense points, which means that it is a decent little, a decently armed or defended against missiles and similar type problems ship for the Interstellar League. It's got good shielding. It's got a gigantic point defense gun in the nose, or a gigantic disintegrator in the nose, and 2 disintegrators basically on the top of the ship to add adjunct firepower. It probably would have been better off if we had put 2 heavy disintegrators in a fixed mount, which we definitely have the spaces for. But this will be a more interesting ship to watch things through. Now, up here, I've just unhidden the analytics tools. This brown area is the amount of missile clutter by Avid Window. We don't have any missiles. This tan area is the torpedo clutter. And this is average damage by Avid Window. This is a really useful tool because it allows you to select the range, which we're going to go and set at 4 for here, and we're going to set at 7 for here. And it allows you to set the amount of ECM you're shooting through, which we're going to set to 0 because we have pretty good ECCM. And what it does is it actually goes through a hidden part of this worksheet and figures out what your average damage is every time you pull the trigger when you fire through a specific Avid window. You'll notice that our highest average damage isn't actually at the top of it isn't actually our nose mount, although it's pretty damn close. It is actually here on the overlap arcs between the sort of point defense guns, which are also overlapping with the disintegrators. If we go down to hit location 7, if we go down to range 7, which is what I put over here, you'll see that we have a similar issue with the guns, and we seem to have a conditional formatting error over here that I'll need to fix at some point, if I can never figure out what it is. We can also take a look at adding it to range 11, which is another common range break in Squadron Strike. And it goes through and adjusts the average damage down. And now you can see where that keel gun is paying off. At range 11, that keel gun is still averaging 15 points of damage when it hits. And let's show you how we're actually getting those numbers now that I think about it. If we scroll down to here, you'll see that we have some bar graphs that are right next to where the weapon mount toggles are, where the firing arc toggles are. This shows us the average damage that the weapon does at range 11, range 14, and range 20 as sort of a bar graph. It doesn't give us numbers, it just sort of gives us a relative bar graph based on how much average damage the weapon mount is going to do, or that row of the weapon mount is going to do at a given range. As you can see, if you actually get to range 3 with your Closin defense systems, you do a fair amount of damage here. The peak here is 7.84 damage. The average damage for the mount is 5.78. And if you look at the disintegrators, rather, I keep on calling them disruptors, and you take a look at the values out here, one of the things that we have is we have more tools that we can show you. I'm going to scroll to the right a little bit so I can use these drop downs. If I use average damage, and I use average damage down here, now this is average damage without using ECM. And average damage is going to be set up down here, and I'm going to wait for this to calculate because these are going through some interesting statistical rigors here. As you can see, the peak average damage at range 3, if something comes up behind you, is almost 12 points. And the Closin defense system does actually contribute damage all the way out to range 11, which is good because that's one of the major range brackets for the disintegrators, especially the big disintegrator up in the nose. So just for comparison purposes, just for comparison purposes, we're going to go and see what would happen to this average damage if we went with the nose fixed mount that we had originally, and we put in a heavy disruptor rather than a heavy disintegrator rather than a capital disintegrator. And we're going to wait for this to catch up. But what we're really going to look at over here is the average damage by range once this is done calculating. As you can see, the average damage by range for the disintegrators drops a little bit, but you have 2 of them, so you'd actually be adding those values together a little bit. And if we look up here, we can see that we went from a 25 average damage right through the center of the ship to 27 average damage all the way through a 9-window firing arc in the nose. What we give up for that is a lot of range, and we give up a lot of damage at range. This is very, very low damage at range for this particular weapon. So we're going to go back to the original design, because in part, while keel mounts are interesting and fun and people love them, they aren't always the best idea because you usually can't get twice as much damage out of one keel mount as you can out of 2 fixed mounts. You can get that, but keel mounts are actually best for things like, say, a wave motion gun, where you've got a high damage amount and you've got an awful lot of interesting weapon traits on the weapon. And now we need to change this back to back to keel mount. And we're going to wait until the calculations are done and it lets us know that everything is back to normal, and it is. And that is the creation of the Nelson-class frigate for Squadron Strike. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start up SSPDF, and we're going to go and take a quick look at what the SSD looks like. So SSPDF is a Flash-based tool. Uses the Adobe Air runtime. It's written by Michael Zabrowski. And it is the tool that I use to go and make ships, to go and make SSDs. So we're going to go and delete these for a moment. And we're going to go and select the Nelson. And we're going to wait for this to finish updating. This particular page is actually one of the reasons why the spreadsheet takes a little bit of time to calculate. This is a very, very long XML file that's being generated. We select the range from column Y to column AK. They're all shaded gray to make sure that you don't miss any. Copy. Paste into SSPDF. Wait for a moment for it to finish processing. You can tell it's finished processing because you see the pages marked down here. And we're going to go to Preview. And we have the Nelson. And surprisingly enough, we have the Nelson with 2 ships on 1 SSD. So it's actually a fairly compact little design here. We can actually take a close look at the capital disintegrator. And oh dear Lord, does that thing have great accuracy at close range. It's also got Ignore Shields 8+, Slag, and it can be used for Splash once something has down shields. We've also got a couple of standard disintegrators over here, just so you have something for comparison. That close range bracket only goes out to range 7. The range 11 bracket needs a 6+ to hit, and the 12 to 16 bracket needs an 8+, so it'll barely hit at long range. Plus, it only does 2 base damage and has a maximum penetration of 4. So yes, that capital disintegrator, one can get very, very lucky with it, and it can be kind of terrifying. Anyway, we're going to go and output this as a PDF, and you'll get to see this PDF along with a few others that I've developed in the next update on the Patreon. Let's see, text SSD art, and go to Interstellar Expanse, and we're just going to go, let's make this the Nelson. Thank you again for watching, and this is a walkthrough of designing a single ship, the Nelson-class light cruiser for Squadron Strike.